Joined now by Clayton Sayfie of the Wolverine. And Clayton, on Friday night, the expected happened. Sherrone Moore is now Michigan's new head coach. And he's talked, and Ward Manuel's talked. And does it feel, it's obviously not Jim Harbaugh, but does it feel as close to the Jim Harbaugh regime as it's going to get?
Yeah, it feels like a continuation for sure. I mean, and also too, part of Jim Harbaugh's legacy, I think, is grooming Sherrone Moore, the next guy to take over. And obviously he had Jim Harbaugh's endorsement. So it'll be interesting to see what this era is. I mean, clearly Sherrone Moore has his own personality and he'll put his own stamp on the program. But he said on Saturday morning at his introductory press conference, he wants to keep the philosophy the same, not only on both sides of the ball, but also within the program.
We're not satisfied with victories of the past, but we're hungry for future success. We want to attack every day as we're walking into the building as if it's the Monday of the national title game. All hands on deck. We want to make sure that we're in the best position that we can compete on and off the field. We will work extremely hard every day to represent this university, this program, this city, this state, and attack every day as hard as we can.
Physicality, playing Michigan football. He's an offensive lineman and an offensive line coach. He's going to want to run the ball. He's going to, want to have a really good offensive line and defensive line, win in the trenches. So it's going to be similar. And he said he wants to take recruiting to another level. He's going to be involved with, helping NIL get a boost there. So, things are going to be different. He's going to be aggressive. He said he wants to be aggressive in every area of the program. So there's going to be changes, but at the same time, this is, a continuation of what Michigan has built. And by the way, as you know, Andy, Sherrone Moore helped build a lot of what Michigan has become anyway. So that's a big part of this as well.
That's the thing. It feels like the identity that they have now began to get established when he got moved from being the tight ends coach to being the offensive line coach. Now, he wasn't elevated to offensive coordinator quite yet, but it feels like that is when this sort of hard-nosed, really heavy, run-heavy identity started to get forged.
Yeah, no doubt. And really, it was Jim Harbaugh kind of going back to his roots as well, and something that I think suited Sherrone Moore really well. And at that point, Jim Harbaugh replaced 6 out of 10 assistant coaches. Sherrone Moore was one of the 4 that was held over, along with Jay Harbaugh and a couple others. One of the reasons why he was held over is because of the relationships he has with the players. He's a great recruiter, very energetic on the younger side. We all know Michigan got a little bit younger back in 2021. But then also elevating him, I think Jim Harbaugh knew at some point he wanted to make him the offensive line coach, and it was the right time. Then they go back to this identity that we've seen kind of the pendulum swing back a little bit more in college football. I mean, back in 2017, when Haskins comes in that Michigan-Ohio State game for JT Barrett and starts throwing all over him, to me, that was the moment in the Big Ten, at least, when Ohio State took that step to, pass heavy. We all know, they could spread it out already, but the pendulum kind of swung back when Jim Harbaugh made a lot of those moves back in 2021. And then at the end of the season in 2023, Michigan's the toughest team with the best linemen on both sides. And again, like we said, Sherrone Moore was a big part of that. So I think that's going to be Michigan's identity moving forward. And, when you look back at the journey of Sherrone Moore, it's been pretty incredible to watch. He's moved up quickly. This is only the 3rd place he's been as an assistant coach and then now as the head coach. But he's been here longer than anywhere, and he's, as Michigan as any of the other guys that are going to be moving this program forward.
So on Thursday's show, we talked to Anthony Broom, your colleague at the Wolverine, and he was going over a 3-point plan of what Sherrone Moore would need to do to be successful right away. One of those is out the window. Jesse Minter, which we kind of thought was going to happen. He's going to follow Jim Harbaugh as a defensive coordinator for the Chargers. So what does Sherrone Moore do now in terms of filling that spot?
Yeah, that's a big one. I think he's going to probably look at some people with Ravens ties, surprise, surprise, and just kind of keep that pipeline going. It's kind of funny too, because, now that Jim Harbaugh wants to make Los Angeles, Michigan West, as he said, with kind of a pipeline there, Sherrone said, we have 2 pipelines to the NFL now. And I think that could benefit them, not only with some of their guys getting drafted or picked it up, as undrafted free agents, or even guys that have already been in the league and what have you. But it's also going to help, as we've seen with, and as you and I talked about a couple weeks ago, kind of that that internship program as well. And it benefits both sides. It benefited the Ravens with Mike McDonald after he kind of had a tryout for a year with Michigan, and it benefited Michigan getting him for a year and then Jesse Minter for 2. So I think stuff like that's going to continue. So people with Ravens ties to look for. Zach Orr is one name that people are kind of circling as well. And then Clint Hurt, a guy who was the defensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. That staff obviously getting revamped there with a new head coach coming in at some point. And Sherrone Moore worked with him at Louisville, so they have ties there. But I do think they want to keep the system pretty similar, regardless of whether or not they get somebody who has worked either with Minter, McDonald, or with the Ravens. So that's going to be really interesting as they move forward here. And Andy, you and I had talked, I think off air about a month ago or two, that, on the offensive side, is he going to call plays as a head coach when that time comes? Sounds like he's not going to. So that's going to be another big hire as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting decision. And you look at, right across the rivalry, Ryan Day just deciding he doesn't want to call plays anymore. You've seen it around college football. Gus Malzahn did it before this past season. Eli Drinkwitz decided to stop calling plays before this past season. And there's a lot to get your arms around as a head coach. But I think that's interesting with Sherrone Moore, because the first taste of him as a head coach we got, he was calling the plays in those games.
And
he was
coaching the O-line.
Exactly. So it is maybe he will be refreshed, maybe less workload than at the end of last season. But I do think that's interesting, and it does allow him to kind of put a stamp on that program. You mentioned Clint Hurt. Interesting thing about him, you don't have to worry about can this guy recruit. Longtime college assistant before he went to the Seahawks with Louisville and with Miami, and so that's a guy who has some very good recruiting ties as well. You mentioned Sherrone Moore and wanting to kind of supercharge the recruiting. And I think that's interesting because Michigan sort of, I think, set a new blueprint for how you can win a national title, where you mix in some 5 stars and then some guys you developed in some 4 stars. But it sounds like Sherrone Moore would like to recruit in the more Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, Ryan Day type vein.
Yeah, I think so. And even maybe Dan Lanning as well, with just the buzz that Oregon has created. Obviously, NIL has played a factor in that. And Sherrone Moore said he's going to be heavily involved. And he's already had, this is Saturday morning, he was hired Friday night at 7:01 p.m. or whatever it was. He said he had already had NIL, conversations and everything as we talked to him on Saturday morning. So I think that's going to be a factor. But here's the thing, one, Michigan did kind of create this different blueprint on how to win a national championship, but Michigan also had Jim Harbaugh and a fantastic staff. Not every coaching staff around the country is going to have that luxury to have somebody like that heading your program and the way they develop, the way they run the program. And Sherrone Moore is not Jim Harbaugh. So I think, to win, they're probably going to have to recruit at a little bit of a higher level. And I think Sherrone Moore understands that. And either way, I think he would want to recruit at a higher level. He talked about being the face of the program on the recruiting trail as a head coach recruiter, in terms of really getting on the road, really getting to connect with these kids. Because in Harbaugh the last few years, he wasn't climbing as many trees and sleeping over. Doing the sleepovers as much. He was still involved, did a lot of satellite camps when they could. But I think Sherrone Moore wants to, I think supercharge is a great way to put it, the way you said it. I think he wants to take it to that next level, as he said. And, that's going to be something that he's really good at. People forget because so early on in his tenure, when he was tight ends coach, he was their ace recruiter. Like, he was also in on all the top recruitments that top recruits Michigan was going after, regardless of position, regardless of area of the country. He did hone in on the Midwest when he was tight ends coach. Took a little bit of a step back in that area once he became O-line coach and O coordinator. And then obviously this past year having to serve as interim head coach for 4 games. But I expect him to be really involved as a head coach recruiter, as the face of this program. And I think that could give them a good advantage as they try to land some of these higher rated guys that they haven't been able to get the last couple of years.
Well, and that probably explains the abdicating of play calling duties and game planning duties. If that is going to be one of your primary focuses and you want to be the face of the program in recruiting, we talk about Nick Saban. He was Alabama's most aggressive recruiter. He was their closer. Right. The top 15 guys on the board, those are his guys. And so I would imagine that that's something Sherrone Moore wants to do. Speaking of recruiting, we got to talk about Mr. Herbert. And I know probably the casual fan thinks when I tell you Mr. Herbert, we're talking about Justin Herbert, Jim Harbaugh's new quarterback with the Chargers. No, we're talking about Ben Herbert, the strength coach at Michigan. What are the chances that Sherrone Moore can keep him around?
Yeah, so I think initially and probably still happening, the buzz was that Jim Harbaugh is going to try to take Ben Herbert with him. Michigan strength coach, who is one of 2 in the country who makes over $1 million now. He's been that valuable to this program. Jim Harbaugh tried to nominate him for the Broyles Award a couple years ago. The Broyles Award said, no, you can't do that.
And he should have won it. He should have won it too.
Right, absolutely. And so, but the Broyles Award came back and said, yeah, you can't do that. But that's how much he means to Jim Harbaugh and this program and, the players and everything else. Now, from what we've heard, there's a strong chance that Sherrone Moore is going to be able to retain Ben Herbert and keep him in. He said yesterday that he's very encouraged. We've also spoken to people around the program who it sounds like that's the way that things are leaning at this point. And a big clue as well would be Sherrone Moore, before he addressed the team on Saturday morning for the first time as Michigan's head coach. The guy who addressed the team before him was Ben Herbert. The guy who was leading the workout before that was Ben Herbert. And it was fitting the first team meeting was right in the middle of the weight room there with Herb and Sherrone. So I think that's going to happen most likely. And that is huge for Michigan. He's also associate head coach. I mean, Jim Harbaugh tried to give him like every title he possibly could because he just loves the dude. But everybody loves the dude, including Sherrone Moore. And I think they understand how important it is to keep him.
Well, as a good strength coach, is the second most important staff member on any staff. And
right.
You're absolutely right. And the fact that they had a workout before the first meeting with him as head coach, like
it was like during. Yeah.
Right. Everybody stop lifting. I'm here. You know me. Continue lifting. Is that the meeting right there?
It seems like this is just while we're on that topic too, because I think people are starting to learn who Sherrone Moore is. A lot of us who have covered him, have gotten to know him a little bit, and especially in a media setting. Sherrone Moore is a very lovable guy. He has a smile on his face. He's young. He's energetic. He connects with the kids. Sherrone Moore is also a hard ass, and you'll see that in his speech.
We will be smart, tough, dependable, relentless, enthusiastic, and do that at a championship level with a championship team that loves football, plays with a passion for the game, plays for each other, plays for that winged helmet.
And, he said the offensive linemen, one day they hate him, one day they love him, but all he cares about is if they respect him. So this is not going to be a guy that's a pushover by any means. He's kind of strikes that balance that Jim Harbaugh was able to when Jim Harbaugh really hit his sweet spot in his back half of his career at Michigan, where he was able to connect with the kids, have that relationship, be the funny, quirky guy, the guy who's doing squats in the weight room with his khakis on, but also the guy that's going to light into him. And you need to have that in this day and age. He's trying to keep his roster intact right now, but he also said in that speech, pretty much get out if you don't want to work hard and work at a championship level. So I think they're going to keep that aspect of this thing going, where he's going to have that relationship with these guys. It's important, especially with NIL transfer portal, but he's going to get on him as well.
Well, this explains why Jim Harbaugh ID'd him, because I would imagine Jim Harbaugh saw a lot of himself in Sherrone Moore. Like one guy's a quarterback, one guy's an offensive lineman, but they really do seem cut from the same cloth in terms of how they manage players.
You know how Sherrone won Jim over? He told the story at his presser yesterday. His interview when he was at Central Michigan, comes down to Ann Arbor for his interview for the tight ends coach position. He said the first thing he did was pulled out a chair and started showing them how, his run block technique.
I took a chair out and I showed how to run block. And all right, obviously you guys know Coach. I mean, he was right there. He got up, he tightened his belt. He wanted me to run block him. He pulled another guy. He's like, yeah, go ahead and base drive him, down block him. I'm like, I'm gonna knock him out if I do that. So it was phenomenal. It was like a 5-hour meeting, and then we went into film, and he was like, yeah, you want to spend the night? Coach, I came with a suit. He's like, yeah, we'll go downstairs, get you some gear. It'll be great. I was like, sure.
He spent the night. They offered him the job in the morning, and the rest was history. But so yes, Andy, they are cut from the same cloth.
That is amazing. Speaking of Jim Harbaugh, he is in Baltimore supporting brother John in the AFC Championship game. Before that game, he was interviewed by CBS, and got asked about leaving Michigan, and the answer I thought was really telling. He said, "There's only one Lombardi Trophy," and this is something that you and I have talked about a bunch over the last few months. But how hard was the pull of the idea of winning that Super Bowl that eluded him the first time around?
Yeah, and I wonder, even when he took the job back in December of 2014, if in the back of his head, like it was in the back of many people's minds, that at some point he was going to go back and chase a Super Bowl. Now, I don't think, he's a guy that lives in the moment. I don't think that was kind of, all he thought about over the last 9 years or anything else. But I do think the last few years, when they've started to have a little bit more success, he was drawing a little bit of interest from the NFL, that kind of intrigued him. And he wanted to go 2 years ago. I think he didn't want to go as much last year because of the team he had coming back.
What he had, yeah.
Yeah, they end up winning the national championship. And now, he's a builder. You wrote a great column about this after he left. And I was thinking the same thing, where you go back to what he said. He's a construction guy. He's not an architect, but he's a builder. And there's some dirt now in Los Angeles for him to use to go build. But he also, he almost won the Super Bowl and almost got there as a player. He almost won it against his brother in 2012 as a coach. He said, what did he say? The sand in the hourglass, there or something like that. Like basically,
he said there's only so much sand in the hourglass. Exactly.
Yes.
He's 60 years old. So you're exactly right. And,
yeah,
it was an incredible run. And it sounds like this worked out exactly as he would have hoped with Sherrone Moore taking over, because it feels like that's who he wanted running the program.
Yeah, I think so. I think he made that very clear from what Ward Manuel said on Saturday, that when he called to tell him that, hey, I'm taking the Chargers job and everything else, it was, hey, Sherrone Moore is my pick. He also stood in front of the team. Jim Harbaugh flew back to Ann Arbor for his final team meeting, which lasted quite a while, I guess, and was pretty emotional on Friday. And he said there's nobody better to lead the team than Sherrone Moore. He made that clear in other interviews that he had done. And obviously Michigan wrapped it up pretty quickly in just about exactly 48 hours. So yes, I think Jim Harbaugh made it clear. And Andy, I think that he was kind of hinting at this over the last really year, that he wanted Sherrone Moore to be a guy that eventually runs this Michigan program. So that's important. That he has that endorsement. That's not a small thing. And I think that's going to help the roster stay intact. I think that's going to help really the ideas down the road. I mean, Jim Harbaugh leaves on incredibly good terms here. So maybe Michigan West. You got Michigan West in LA. You got Michigan East in Baltimore. Hell, maybe even Charlotte, with Biff Poggi down there. So you got some, they're starting to kind of take over the country here, the map.
Dueling internship programs and feeder systems for defensive coordinators. And yeah, they got it all. And I appreciate Michigan doing this quick. I got a little tired of going on radio shows and people out, who else are they going to look at? Who are they going to interview? I'm like, they're going to hire Sherrone Moore.
Yeah.
And that shuts down the radio interview real quick.
Right. That's not the answer they want to hear, because they want to talk about this guy or that guy. But that's what was going to happen. That's always what was going to happen. And that's what happened.
Yeah. And it sounds like Sherrone Moore hit the ground running. So all of because there was worry about the recruiting process, because, when Jim Harbaugh is looking at NFL jobs, it's hard. Even if Sherrone Moore is going to be the guy, it's very hard if you're Sherrone Moore to say, I'm definitely going to be the guy. Come to a junior day. Let's do all. Now they can do all that stuff.
Yeah, they have, I think, a week before the dead period at least, and I think that's why they wanted to get this. Like, let's get the press conference out of the way. Let's get you to the basketball game. And by the way, he was there with a bunch of the top players. He's trying to keep them as close to him as possible. And he let Donovan Edwards talk naturally, as one would, to the Michigan crowd there. But he wanted to get that day out of the way. And I think he wanted to make sure he could get all the, first orders of business out of the way, which is staff, because that helps with recruiting too. You got to announce these guys, make sure you retain all the guys, including Ben Herbert. You got to make sure guys don't go in the portal. Which, by the way, kind of helps. It's weird because the timing for Washington and Alabama wasn't great. But now that semesters are kind of, 3-4 weeks underway, it might help Michigan in that regard, at least until the spring portal period. So that's going to be big. And then you really can, kind of continue to sell them throughout spring ball and during winter workouts. But yeah, he's got a lot on his plate immediately. But he feels like he's got the energy and the, just the motivation to really hit the ground running here.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see. And yeah, the guys that are already there, they're in classes, they're hanging around for the spring semester, may as well do spring ball. And yeah, it probably does put a dent in who might go into the portal. Although I'm sure there are plenty of people who are in those dudes' ears because there's a lot of good players at Michigan. But we shall see. New head coach Clayton Sayfie. Sounds like new boss, almost the same as the old boss.
Yeah, not going to be too different. It's going to be fun though, for sure.
Appreciate it, Clayton.
Yep.
We're joined now by the great Pete Nakos, who, Pete, have you gotten to breathe a little bit this weekend?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Our good friend of the Andy Staples show, JD Piquel, made a comment on Twitter yesterday. He said, "Oh, we finally have some time from the portal to breathe." I'm like, "Don't you dare jinx it!" I walked out of the apartment yesterday. Big day for me. Yes, left the laptop here for like an hour. Yeah, big day.
What does sunshine look like? What was that like?
Oh, it rained. So, but yeah,
of course, yeah, of course. So, yeah, the only really kind of biggish news out of the transfer portal was Jabbar Muhammad from Washington committing to Oregon, and that's something that's kind of feels like it's been in the works for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Jabbar Muhammad is when he went in the portal right after Kalen DeBoer took the Alabama job, Texas and Oregon made in-home visits. And right after that, had a source I really trust reach out to me and say, like, this is going to be Oregon's to watch. Would be very surprised if he went elsewhere. And I reported that throughout his recruitment, and obviously he took the official visits to Texas and Alabama. And the whole time I was continued to be being told that Oregon was going to be the school to watch. And then he made the official visit this weekend, as Justin Hopkins reported from Scoop Duck. And then, yeah, he committed. And it's another just huge pickup for Dan Lanning in the portal, especially in that secondary.
Yeah, and that's something that he did last year where he really upgraded the talent in the secondary, and you saw it paid dividends pretty quickly. And it does seem like he knows where he wants his talent level. He's not quite there yet. But as they move into the Big Ten, I would imagine they feel pretty comfortable where they're at.
If I am in Eugene right now in the Oregon facility and I'm Dan Lanning, I feel like we have a great roster that has one of the best chances of any team in the Big Ten to win the league in our first year, making that jump. And I would have to think that it's going to be college football playoff or bust for the Ducks.
Elsewhere in the Big Ten, Sherrone Moore is named the head coach at Michigan. And even though Jim Harbaugh left Wednesday night, so the portal's been open for several days, no Michigan players in there yet.
No Michigan players in there yet. I think that Michigan got who they wanted, got who the roster wanted, and probably got the guy who is really going to step in and do a good job in Ann Arbor, just knowing the infrastructure and how it's all figured out. The one comment I will make about the transfer portal is, like, if a Michigan player probably would wait to the spring, I would have to bet.
Because they're in classes and have been for weeks. Yeah.
The academic calendar is not doing any of those players favors right now. So not ruling it out that the Sherrone Moore hire, like, maybe change minds. I'm just saying that I won't be surprised if maybe a Michigan player who was thinking of going in would prefer to go in the spring just because of the academic calendar.
Yeah. And look, we've seen it with Sherrone Moore coming in to replace Jim Harbaugh. If we would assume they're going to act kind of the same way they've acted the past few years, which means Michigan's probably going to pick up a few more post-spring because that was something they've done really well each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, the Wolverines have kind of been on pause, right, with like Harbaugh trying to figure out what he's going to do. And they didn't have a junior day. They didn't really get overly aggressive in the portal. I think part of that was obviously winning a national championship. But obviously, again, some spots to fill. And obviously, the biggest one that we're all going to be looking to is quarterback and what Sherrone Moore decides to do in his first year at that position.
Yeah, he's got some guys on the roster. He can check them out in the spring. And then if none are satisfactory, then you put up the old help wanted sign and see who hops in. Although Auburn probably has that help wanted sign up too. So there are a few spots where there may be some job openings.
Yeah, I definitely think there are a few schools, including Auburn and Michigan, that are definitely going to be in the quarterback hunt. And the funny thing about the spring too, Andy, and you know this, is like the team might enter spring ball feeling really good about a quarterback, and then they watch how practice and the spring game goes, and they might rush to the portal.
Yeah. It's going to be, as you keep telling us, the spring portal is going to be wilder than it was in the past couple of years. I'm very intrigued to see how all of that shakes out. But while we've got a moment to breathe here, let's talk about some of these rosters coming out of the winter portal window. Who can we say we just mentioned Oregon as one of the bigger winners of that with Jabbar Muhammad just now, Dylan Gabriel, obviously the biggest name that they got out of the portal. But who are some of the other teams that really did upgrade their rosters?
I think the ones that really come to mind right off the bat is obviously Louisville has done everything they needed to do to be right back in the ACC championship mix. Yet again, Deion Sanders revamps the roster through the transfer portal at Colorado. Ole Miss probably puts together one of the more overall talented classes I think we've seen in recent memory, obviously led by Walter Nolan. You can't overshadow Ohio State and what they've done with Julian Sain, Caleb Downs, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins. And then a couple dark horses too. Like I really like what Cal did. They brought in Mikey Matthews and a really talented offensive lineman from Temple. Florida State yet again brings in some Alabama players who could really be a big time upgrade for the Seminoles. So yeah, a lot of teams have impressed. Those are just some off the top of my head, to be honest with you.
Yeah, the Florida State one's interesting because it seemed like the most popular place for them to go the last couple of years was South Carolina, but it seems like Tuscaloosa was the spot that they were drawing from the most this time around. Another couple guys you mentioned, like Mikey Matthews going to Cal. I think that's a really interesting one. MJ Morris going to Maryland. I think that's an interesting one from NC State. So MJ Morris's situation was he played as a true freshman at NC State, got hurt, and then they recruit Brennan Armstrong kind of over him and say Brennan's the starter. And so MJ was going to redshirt, and then they wind up not being pleased with Brennan playing MJ, and then he goes 3-1 to the starter and was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and redshirt, and then I'm out. Yeah. And so he is now replacing Talia Tungabailoa at Maryland. I'm very intrigued with what he can do with Mike Loxley's crew.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other ones that kind of jump out to me too is like everyone kind of jumps to like the Ole Misses and Colorados, but yet again, Steve Sarkisian goes to the transfer portal and gets exactly who he wants. He completely retools the wide receiver room. We'll have to see how that kind of plays out, but just on paper, it seems like Steve Sarkisian did everything they needed to do going into the SEC.
Yeah, and it's he worked at Alabama recently enough to kind of know that roster really well. Got Isaiah Bond, but also got Amari Niblack, the tight end, who I think has a chance to do some JT Sanders type things at Texas, which it feels like that's a pretty easy comparison right there.
I completely agree. The other one that I am probably more intrigued by and want to see how it plays out is South Carolina brought in a really big class of transfer portal players. And the one that obviously jumps out to me is how does the quarterback position kind of shuffle out, right? They have a really talented freshman, Lenore Sellers, and then they bring in Robbie Ashford, who's definitely had some bumps along the way. Which way does Shane Beamer go? And what could really be a defining year of his tenure with the Gamecocks?
Yeah, because Spencer Rattler is gone, and you have to. And it sounds like, I mean, that's basically deciding what you want your offense to be when you pick between those guys. Because we've seen Ashford at Oregon and at Auburn. We know what he is, and then with Sellers, we'll get a chance to see that. And they've got some younger talent that they've been kind of bringing along. So it's interesting. So Pete, I don't think I'm going to bring you in for this game, but we will be playing. Whose team is it anyway? I think starting in spring ball, where we make someone guess who plays for who now. I think you probably are a ringer in that game. But
if there are prizes, though, I want in.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll come up with some. We'll definitely have to come up with some gift cards or something like that. We definitely like a Buffalo Wild Wings gift card for sure. But yeah, it is interesting, and this is the thing about the transfer portal and people. I think old school college football fans don't like the fact that there's not as much continuity, but I do get the sense that at least with some fan bases, it gives them a bigger sense of hope in the offseason if they did not have the kind of season they wanted the year before.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there that maybe it's a team that only won 3 or 4 games. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, like I can review tape of 20 players if I'm like a football junkie and want to see how it's all going to come together. And the college reporter in me also says that because of the transfer portal, in my opinion, I think athletes have better brands now because they have more name recognition if they're going from school to school. And I think that's kind of the part of NFL free agency that seeps into the college game now.
Well, the other piece of it, I think, is it makes, and we saw this with Alabama and the struggles with the snap. We saw it with Georgia banged up at receiver there at the end of the season. I feel like it's taken the top, the older depth away from it. Because I just mentioned Florida State, taking, what are they, 5 different Alabama players. And these are not guys, these were not guys who were starting in Alabama. That's exactly right. But are they good enough to start at Florida State?
Yeah.
Very likely.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other school that I was going to mention that has all of a sudden slipped my memory, but I'm going to go back to it, is interested to see how Miami does, right? Cam Ward goes there. All of a sudden, you talk to people in South Beach, and one of the biggest takeaways from this past season was hey, Tyler Van Dyke maybe just isn't the best guy for what we want, and feel like that may have held us back in moments and things. And obviously they go and get the number 1 ranked quarterback, I believe, in the On3 transfer portal rankings. I think Julian Sayin messed up those rankings, but still the point is one of the top quarterbacks in the portal.
I don't consider Julian Sayin a transfer. I know we had an official ruling on that last week where we said signee immediately in the portal does not count as a portal guy anymore.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Cam Ward and Mario Cristobal's offense with a really good recruiting class and some intriguing transfers next to him. Does Miami make the jump and compete with Florida State and Clemson and Syracuse now for an ACC title?
Well, and Shannon Dawson being there, he runs an offense that's really similar to what Cam Ward ran at Incarnate Word and at Washington State. So he should be able to pick it up pretty quickly. And the one thing, and I know people get caught up with the transfer QBs, you got to remember, though, there will be QBs on the roster, and either because of injuries and they have to come in or because they play better, do not count out Emory Williams in this situation because they thought at the end of last season that he might be the guy. And he gets hurt in the Florida State game. I think it was broken collarbone. So he's going to be healthy at some point. And I do think that helps a lot. Now, Emory Williams is in his 2nd year as a college player. If they feel like Cam Ward can give them a bridge and then ease Emory into the starting job, that would work too. But I would not be shocked if he's still there. And then let's stick in the ACC because we talked about Florida State. We didn't mention DJU. That's one of the more fascinating situations. He's the starter at Clemson for 2 seasons. He goes to Oregon State, does well there. Obviously, everything happened with the Pac-12 that happened. Right. He has 1 more year, and now he's in Tallahassee, and he's got to play against Clemson on October 5th.
I know. And going elsewhere, you were just saying that. I was like, oh my gosh, Riley Leonard also transferred. That is how long this entire process
and starts against his former coach on day 1.
Yes,
because Notre Dame plays Texas A&M. So Riley Leonard played for Duke for Mike Elko, and now Mike Elko will be the head coach of the team that plays against Riley Leonard's Notre Dame team on day 1.
It's only January 28th, and it's the 2 months that have passed seems like 3 years to me. It's been incredible.
It does, and it also seems like what this is heading toward is a season that isn't going to feel or look like anything we've ever seen before. And that's what I had a really interesting mailbag segment last week where people were asking me which teams would be the most improved. And it really gave me a chance to dive into the schedules. I don't think people are ready for the kind of variability that these new Big Ten and SEC schedules are going to bring. Some teams got great draws. Some teams,
yeah. Right? Doesn't Florida have a really tough go of it? I know
Florida has the toughest one, probably. Yeah. Ohio, but you know who else has a really brutal?
Ohio State.
No, not Ohio State.
No?
They got a good.
I thought you said Ohio. Okay.
No. Ohio State's is not bad. Michigan's is hard, and I don't like Oregon's very much either.
It is. It's going to be really interesting too, seeing the Big Ten teams have to go from West Coast back home and things like that for the first time. And I know a lot of people have tried to report on it, but what does that schedule look like? And is there actually going to be impacts on how games play out, things like that? We're going to find that out now.
The Pac-12 had a really interesting, when you played when you played a road game on a Friday night, or you played a road game on a Saturday and then had to play a road game on a Friday, how that always, like, it was a pretty consistent, you lost when that happened. So that is another thing that we're going to have to see how that works, because with some of that cross country travel, it can get pretty hairy. So very different world that we're moving into. But Pete, you may have a couple weeks before everything goes crazy again.
Yeah, just a couple weeks. I have April already circled on the calendar and ready to jump back into that.
Hey, listen, this is fine. We got the meat of college basketball. We got March Madness, and then transfer madness again.
Yeah. And basketball and football are gonna coincide. It's gonna be fun.
Oh yeah. You can call Joe Tipton and be like, all right, who's transferring in your sport? So, this is it's gonna be wild. But Pete, thank you so much, and it's been a lot of fun. We will still be regularly checking in, even though your head's not about to explode at all times. So I do appreciate all the time you gave us when you were trying to break stories in between hits.
That's all good. It's been fun.
All right, Pete Nakos, he's relaxing now. This is Pete relaxed. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
We're joined now by Tom Kakert of the Hawkeye Report. Big day in Iowa City, Tom. Big day. You guys have been waiting since October 30th to find out who will run Iowa's offense going forward, and the answer is now known. It is former Western Michigan coach and one-time great Western Michigan Broncos quarterback Tim Lester.
Tim Lester. I jokingly said that I was waiting for some the puff of white smoke, like when you elect a pope from outside the Iowa football complex, that there had been a new offensive coordinator elected, and it's Tim Lester, and it hasn't gone over what I would say great. I think the Iowa fans are kind of underwhelmed by the hire. He was let go by Western Michigan at the end of the 2022 season. This last year, he was an analyst for Green Bay. Kind of fun fact: when Lester was the quarterback there early in his career, his backup quarterback was Matt LaFleur. So that's kind of the connection there. So that's how they kind of know each other. So he ends up at Green Bay. He had been an OC at Syracuse in the mid 2010s, like 2014, 2015. Took over in the middle of 14 with one of the worst offenses in college football. And the next year, he did improve it. It went from the worst offense in college football to just kind of an offense in college football. Improved it by 10 points a game.
One of college football's offenses, yes.
Yes, to 25 points a game instead of 15. So, he's a quarterback too, which I think Iowa needed a legit quarterback coach. So that's big.
Well, and that is the interesting thing. So people are going to look at that last year at Western Michigan, and it was bad. Now, he was playing freshman at quarterback. They were, I think, 124th in yards per play in the country. But I will say the year before, they were 28th in yards per play in the whole country. So it's not like he hasn't had success as an offensive coordinator. But the quarterback's coach part I find very interesting, because I don't know that the average person is aware of who has been coaching quarterbacks the last few years at Iowa. It was Brian Ferentz, who is by trade an offensive line coach.
Yes. Yeah, he's an offensive line coach. They did have John Budmeyer around as kind of one of those analysts / coach thing. I think they called him assistant to the head coach or something.
Assistant to the regional manager, yes.
Yeah, assistant to the regional manager. So he was kind of helping out. He was a quarterback coach by trade at Wisconsin and was at Colorado State for a year. I think Budmeyer's actually going to end up being their wide receivers coach, because they let Kelton Copeland go at the end of the season. But to me, they've actually got an actual living, breathing quarterback coach coaching that, along with being the offensive coordinator. And I think that's a positive development because I think Tim Lester's been a pretty good quarterback coach. So, not NFL guys, but he's done well you talked about that last year at Western, but in those, 3 of the 4 years, we won't count the COVID year where they averaged 41 points a game against MAC teams, but those 3 other years, it was 32, 33 points per game and over 400 yards of total offense every year. So that's, to me, that tells me he's got a big, good offensive repertoire that he can go to.
Yeah, when he had Caleb Ellaby as a
Yeah.
sophomore, he averaged 9 yards per attempt, which is something Iowa hasn't sniffed in quite some time.
No.
So that
No.
would be the hope. And you got, Cade McNamara coming back, and that's the thing I wonder is how much of what happened last year was, obviously losing Eric Allhurt, but losing Cade McNamara when they did. I think they had a lot of plans that just like Deacon Hill was not built
No.
to run a good passing offense, which again, that's also the fault of Iowa's coaches for not having a capable backup.
Yep. Yep. They shop for the groceries too. And they did not have, and that's going to be one of the things to watch this spring, Andy, I think is because Cade McNamara is going to be out. He's coming back from an ACL tear. So, he's at 7-on-7 at best, but I don't even know that they'll do a lot with him out there. But you've got a battle between Deacon Hill and Marco Lainez to be the backup. And if you can't find if you can't feel comfortable with Deacon Hill, and I've suggested they just go to Lainez for the backup position during spring ball and give him all the 1 reps, because see if what you've got there, because you know what you have with Deacon Hill. You absolutely do.
Yeah.
With 9 games of experience, you know what he's capable of doing. So, and then if you're not comfortable with what you have at quarterback, I think in the spring, you look in the portal and you see what's there and see if you can find a backup or even somebody who can push Cade McNamara a little bit, because let's be honest, Cade McNamara has been out basically the last 2 years, with the exception of 7 games in the last 2 seasons.
Tom, is there no one who can go to Kirk Ferentz and say, "Hey, do you remember Brad Banks and how good he was?"
Yeah.
Maybe try to
Yeah,
find somebody who's kind of like that, who can run around and throw. I mean, and CJ
Yeah.
Beathard, to a lesser extent,
did that.
could
He did
run,
that.
but yeah,
Yeah.
and it was a very good offense under, with CJ Beathard running it. Like, I don't understand why is it because they can't get someone who knows how to run, or they choose not to?
I think it's more of a choice, although they do have some guys coming in. I mean, Lainez is pretty mobile. You saw him running around a lot in the Citrus Bowl. If you stuck till the end of that game, and God bless you if you did, but he can move around a little bit. And then a guy coming in, James Reese, and don't expect him to play, but he's a guy who's run like a 10-600. So
Yeah.
he's a guy who can come in and maybe has that mobility. But again, true freshman, really raw. Don't think he can come in and help him this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's going to be an NFL style offense. That's part of, it'll be Kirk Ferentz's offense. And, a guy who just worked with Jordan Love in Green Bay, I would think would be pretty helpful in that respect. But it is also going to be you're right, a difficult offense for a young guy to come in and just pick up right away.
Here's one of the things that with Lester, though, if you look back at his Western teams, they run a lot of RPO sets and they're in the gun a
Yeah.
lot and do a lot of those different things. Is Kirk going to be willing to do that? He's been kind of resistant to do the RPO stuff on a regular basis and kind of sit there in the shotgun and kind of deal that way. It's just not been something he's been interested in. Will he do that now? I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question is how much is he willing to cede control? How much is he willing to change what they do? Because look, Phil Parker's still there. Let's be perfectly honest. Iowa's defense can be good as long as he's there. So you don't have to be perfect offensively to still win a bunch of games. But I do wonder, Tom, like how much does the end of divisions in the Big Ten change the math on this a little bit? Because it's not about being better than Nebraska, Illinois, Purdue, anymore, in Minnesota. It's about you got to be third best, really, if you want to make the playoff.
Mhm. Yeah, and you've got more competition for that because you've got, Michigan,
Oregon,
Ohio State,
Washington.
Penn State,
Yeah.
Oregon, Washington, USC. You've got some heavyweights that are coming at you from all different corners. So, and you've got, teams that are going to be on the rise. Maybe, you get a new regime at Michigan State. Are they, come back and try and get in that race? Purdue, are they going to rise? You've got a lot. Illinois, Brett Bielema. You got Wisconsin. You've got a lot of competition there for that. I don't know that anybody's going to compete with Michigan or Ohio State right out of the gate, but you're going to have some competition there.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see because, your fan base, they understand the message boards we see, and it's interesting because it's a group that is kind of just developed a really dark sense of humor about all of this more than anything else.
Gallows humor. They've got gallows.
Yeah, they're not
humor.
even mad anymore. Like,
no.
What would the Iowa fan base do if Iowa had an efficient? I don't even want to say fun. I just want to say efficient offense that scored, mid-20s a game and kept the ball a little bit.
Does that guy become the front runner to take over for Kirk Ferentz? Who's
good
going to be
question.
69? Who's going to be 69 years old in August? If a guy comes in and puts some lights up the scoreboard a little bit, who knows? Beth Getz, the new AD. I don't know what her agenda is going to be in terms of hiring people, but it's something that you think about. You have to think about as an offensive coordinator, and that's why I wondered if they might attract somebody, kind of out of the norm, because they might say, "Hey, if I come here and I do really well, because the bar is so low right now for a good offense, maybe I could become the next head coach at the University of Iowa, a Big Ten school." And the Big Ten jobs now, Andy, as you know, are like a golden ticket. I mean, it's the Big Ten,
Highly
SEC,
coveted.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Now, this is something that I think you probably answer a lot, but for a more national audience, why not Phil Parker as the head coach? He's clearly the best defensive coach maybe there ever was, and probably should be paid $10 million a year.
Yeah. Don't know that he really wants to do it. He's kind of told me before, just in interviews, that he's really not all that interested in being a head coach. Now, I'll tell you who might be a future head coach. There's two guys on staff. One of them that kind of a fan favorite right now is probably LeVar Woods, who's the special teams coordinator, who is really well thought of in the industry. I know. I believe Nick Saban tried to hire him a couple years ago to come down to Alabama. And then also Seth Wallace, who has taken on the title now of assistant head coach and linebackers coach. He was the assistant defensive coordinator before. Again, creating titles so you can give guys more money so they stay. But he's a dynamite coach, dynamite recruiter. And if Phil Parker ever left or retired, Seth Wallace would be Iowa's DC tomorrow.
I am very intrigued to see how this happens, because you may be right. Like, if anybody ever did unlock the Iowa offense and figure out how to make it work, the world will beat a path to your door. I mean, they're
going to get a head coaching job somewhere that next year, right? Somebody's going to come to you and go, if you can fix this, you're a head coach somewhere next week.
Exactly. So I am in Mobile, Alabama, Tom, and I am going to see a gentleman who has been very important to Iowa football for the last few years. And that, of course, is Tory Taylor, the punter.
Yeah.
And I got to ask you, one, what do I need to ask him?
That's a good question. I think ask him about the punting is winning shirts, because those were such a cool thing. I thought that was just such a novel thing that he did, and did it for charity too, to give back to a charity that helps young families that in need, and people, helping people out. So I would say that might be something to ask him about, the t-shirts, and his first it's so wild. I remember this like it was yesterday. First game punting was in front of no one. It was during the COVID year at Purdue, and there was nobody there. And just what that must have been like for him. That's his first college football game he's ever seen, was that he played in. So, and it was there was no one there.
Broke in without 85,000 screaming fans, and then got used to that. Yeah. So the next question, though, how do they replace him?
They've got an Australian. Reese Dockett,
Another Australian, right in the pipeline.
So here's a cool story. So we're down at the bowl game and we're waiting to talk to players. It was me and Scott Docterman, our mutual friend, and Chad Lysko from the Register, and I think John Steppe from the Gazette. And we're just kind of standing there, and this guy walks out, and we thought maybe he was Reese, and he goes, "No, I'm Mackenzie," and it was Tory Taylor's coach who coaches Reese actually too. And so we got to talk to him, and he said Reese has a chance to be better than Tory Taylor.
Whoa, that is
Yeah, he goes.
he's
got a bigger leg. Yeah, he said he's got a bigger leg. So yeah, so it pays to be there early and ask people if they're Reese or not. When they're walking out of practice.
How do you know? Are they just holding Vegemite? Like, how do you know someone's Australian?
I don't know. We just saw this guy walking by, and he kind of looked like him, but he wasn't. And then we just, I think he talked to somebody, and we heard an Australian accent. And so we're like, maybe it is. So it was fun.
Well, I'm going to throw another shrimp on the Barbie. Get ready to interview Tory Taylor.
There we go.
Here in Mobile. Tom, thank you so much. Enjoy covering an offense that you now know who's in charge of.
Yeah, it'll be exciting. Can't wait.
Yeah, you're radiating excitement right now, Tom. Thank you so much.